Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that on Thursday, February 13th, 2026, the chief legal officer of Goldman Sachs, one of Wall Street's most powerful and prestigious investment banks, announced her resignation after revelations that she received luxury gifts from Jeffrey Epstein and called him Uncle Jeffrey in dozens of affectionate emails where she described him as being like having another older brother? And what if I told you that this resignation represents not an isolated incident, but rather the continuation of a systematic collapse of elite professional networks that have spent decades protecting powerful individuals from accountability for their associations with one of the most notorious criminals in modern American history? Catherine Remler's fall from the pinnacle of corporate legal practice to forced resignation illustrates how the ongoing release of Epstein-related documents continues to expose the extent to which prominent figures in finance, politics, and law maintained inappropriate relationships with Epstein long after his conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor in 2008. Her case is particularly significant because it demonstrates how these relationships operated within the highest levels of American corporate governance, and how institutions like Goldman Sachs actively protected executives whose personal conduct created obvious conflicts of interest and potential legal liability. The timeline of Remler's relationship with Epstein reveals a pattern of deliberate engagement that continued and intensified after his criminal conviction became public knowledge. Remler first met Epstein in 2014, during her transition from serving as White House counsel under President Barack Obama to entering private legal practice with the law firm Latham & Watkins. This timing is crucial because Epstein had already been a registered sex offender for 6 years when Remler began corresponding with him, and his criminal background was widely known within the legal and financial communities where both operated. The emails released by the Department of Justice show that Remler not only maintained contact with Epstein but actively sought to deepen their relationship, despite being fully aware of his criminal history. In one exchange from 2015, Epstein requested legal advice regarding potential representation of Bank Edmond de Rothschild, writing that the bank had a Justice Department problem like every other Swiss bank. Remler not only provided this advice, but ultimately took the bank as a client for Latham & Watkins, creating a direct financial benefit from her association with Epstein. The personal correspondence reveals inappropriate intimacy with a convicted sex offender that extended far beyond professional courtesy. Remler consistently used affectionate language that suggests a level of familiarity inappropriate between any attorney and a convicted sex offender, particularly one whose crimes involved the exploitation of minors. When Epstein sent her expensive gifts, she responded with messages like, "So lovely and thoughtful, thank you to Uncle Jeffrey." The exclamation points and familiar address reveal someone who was not merely maintaining a professional relationship, but actively cultivating a personal friendship. The gifts themselves represent a clear violation of professional ethics and corporate governance standards. During her time at Latham & Watkins, Remler received multiple expensive presents from Epstein, including Hermes handbags, Fendi purses, spa treatments, Bergdorf Goodman gift cards, flowers, and even a fur coat. These items, worth tens of thousands of dollars, were given by someone who was already a convicted sex offender to an attorney who was simultaneously providing legal services that benefited Epstein's financial interests. Wall Street firms, including Goldman Sachs, maintain strict policies regarding gifts between employees and clients or business associates, precisely because such arrangements create conflicts of interest and potential exposure to bribery allegations. Goldman Sachs requires employees to receive pre-approval before accepting gifts from clients, and prohibits acceptance of gifts that could reasonably be seen as influencing professional judgment. Remler's acceptance of expensive luxury goods from Epstein without disclosure to her firm violated these basic ethical standards and created exactly the kind of compromising situation that corporate compliance programs are designed to prevent. When Goldman Sachs hired Remler as chief legal officer in 2020, the firm's leadership was either unaware of her relationship with Epstein or chose to overlook it, despite conducting the kind of thorough background investigation that would normally be required for such a senior position. Either scenario raises serious questions about Goldman's due diligence procedures and risk management practices. If they were unaware of her Epstein connections, it suggests their vetting process was inadequate for identifying obvious reputational risks. If they knew about the relationship and hired her anyway, it suggests they believed her legal expertise outweighed the potential liability of employing someone with compromising personal associations. The institutional response revealed sophisticated corporate damage control tactics designed to protect both the individual and the institution from accountability. When congressional committees first released Epstein-related emails in November 2025, Goldman Sachs spokesman Tony Fratto defended Remler by emphasizing that the correspondence occurred well before Kathy Remler joined Goldman Sachs and describing her as an exceptional general counsel. This defense strategy attempted to create temporal distance between Remler's personal conduct and her corporate responsibilities, as if her willingness to accept gifts from a convicted sex offender became irrelevant once she changed employers. As late as December 2025, Goldman CEO David Solomon continued to express confidence in Rumler, calling her an excellent lawyer with his full faith and backing. This public support persisted even as additional details about her relationship with Epstein became available through ongoing document releases. Only when the volume of correspondence became indefensible and created unmanageable reputational risk did they force her resignation. Her departure statement carefully avoided admitting wrongdoing, framing it as protecting Goldman Sachs' interests rather than acknowledging personal accountability for professional misconduct. Rumler's resignation continues a broader pattern of elite accountability that has emerged as Epstein-related documents continue to be released by congressional committees and the Department of Justice. Brad Karp, chairman of the major corporate law firm Paul Weiss, resigned from his leadership position on February 4th after emails revealed his own extensive correspondence with Epstein. Morgan McSweeney, chief of staff to British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, resigned on February 8th due to fallout from his recommendation that Starmer appoint Peter Mandelson as UK ambassador to the United States, despite Mandelson's well-documented appearances in Epstein files. This accelerating series of resignations demonstrates that the Epstein scandal is not a historical curiosity, but an ongoing crisis that continues to expose the extent to which powerful individuals across multiple countries and sectors maintained relationships with a convicted sex offender. Each resignation reveals new details about how elite professional networks operated to protect members from scrutiny and accountability, even when their personal conduct created obvious risks to institutional reputation and legal compliance. Rumler was listed as backup executor on Epstein's will, a role that would have given her significant authority over his estate and access to information about his financial dealings and personal relationships, demonstrating involvement that goes far beyond normal professional relationships. The legal implications of these relationships extend far beyond professional embarrassment or reputational damage, and into potential criminal liability for those who provided services that facilitated Epstein's operations while maintaining personal financial benefits from those relationships. The international scope reveals elite corruption transcending national boundaries and institutional affiliations. When British officials resigned due to Epstein connections, it demonstrates that these networks operated globally while providing mutual protection from accountability. The timing of these revelations also coincides with broader questions about how financial institutions and law firms have historically handled clients and associates with criminal backgrounds or questionable reputations. The Epstein case has revealed that many prestigious firms were willing to provide services to someone with a documented history of criminal conduct, suggesting that reputational considerations were subordinated to financial opportunities as long as their relationships could be maintained privately. The financial sector's response will determine whether this leads to meaningful governance reforms or merely removes individuals unlucky enough to have documented relationships. Goldman Sachs faces pressure to demonstrate adequate conflict of interest procedures that can identify and address such relationships before they create institutional liability. The diplomatic complications extend well beyond American corporate governance, as the resignation of British officials demonstrates that the scandal has compromised transatlantic relationships and raised questions about the vetting procedures used by allied governments when appointing senior officials. The most significant implication is what this reveals about systematic elite protection networks that have operated for decades to insulate powerful individuals from accountability. These were not random relationships, but coordinated systems, providing mutual support while insulating members from accountability for conduct that would destroy the lives of ordinary citizens. Rumler's comfortable use of Uncle Jeffrey suggests she operated within social and professional networks where such relationships were normalized and protected. Friends, as we examine Rumler's forced resignation, we observe the systematic exposure of elite protection networks that have insulated powerful individuals from accountability for decades. The careful documentation through emails and gifts provides a detailed case study in how these networks function through personal relationships, professional benefits, and plausible deniability. The ongoing Epstein document releases have disrupted this system by creating permanent public records of relationships that were intended to remain private forever. When communications show someone describing a convicted sex offender as being like another older brother, maintaining fictional professional associations becomes impossible. The language used in Rumler's emails reveals someone who felt comfortable expressing affection toward a convicted sex offender because she operated within networks where such relationships were protected. But the most troubling aspect is how long these relationships continued without institutional intervention. Goldman Sachs employed someone as chief legal officer for over 5 years, while she maintained documented relationships with Jeffrey Epstein. This reveals either catastrophic due diligence failures or deliberate overlooking of obvious conflicts until public pressure made her position untenable. The legal profession's response is particularly important because attorneys maintain institutional accountability across all sectors of society. When prominent legal professionals maintain personal relationships with convicted sex offenders, while providing beneficial services, it undermines public confidence in equal justice and ethical practice. When the chief legal officer of a major financial institution maintains affectionate personal relationships with convicted criminals, it represents a fundamental breach of professional responsibility. The mathematical certainty of additional revelations should concern anyone believing. Professional advancement should be based on competence rather than elite network membership. The Epstein files provide a roadmap for understanding how these networks operate, while creating opportunities for systematic reforms, rather than merely removing documented individuals. The ultimate test will be whether institutions demonstrate genuine transparency and accountability, or merely adapt procedures to better conceal future compromising relationships. The current wave of elite accountability creates an opportunity to establish new standards for professional accountability and institutional governance. But this opportunity will only be realized if it leads to systematic reforms rather than cosmetic changes designed to manage public relations. When elite protection networks operate in darkness, they maintain fiction about separated personal and professional spheres. When exposed to public scrutiny, the systematic nature of elite corruption becomes undeniable, and institutions face pressure to demonstrate genuine commitment to reform.